Welcome to Inside Aesthetics, the world's leading podcast for injectors and aesthetic businesses. I'm Dr. Jake Sloan, an aesthetic doctor with over 16 years experience in facial aesthetics.
And I'm David Siegel, an entrepreneur and business mentor with over 20 years of experience in our industry. Our podcasts are aimed at industry professionals, and any information or advice given is general in nature. You should consult with a healthcare provider before undergoing any treatment.
You can also subscribe to us on Patreon for on-demand content for injectable and business education.
Good morning, mate. Looking forward to another episode on what's trending in aesthetics. What's trending is your phone's going
I better
off.
turn my phone off.
Yes. Turn your phone
Sorry,
off.
my bad. How are you, mate?
Good. Yourself? What's happening?
I'm very well. I'm feeling flustered today. I was a bit late in the traffic and a bit of rain this morning. Sydney traffic.
Welcome to Sydney on Wednesday morning in winter.
Yeah. So how's your week been? What have you been
Pretty
up
good.
to?
Busy. Patreon content. We've got a lot of stuff happening at the moment with various partners that we're working with. We'll talk about some of that today. Content as usual, talking to a couple of people about their businesses. So again, another couple of consulting sessions that I'm going to be sharing with our Patreons, just little 15, 20-minute grabs with people talking about challenges in real time they're having with their businesses, whether it be finance, HR,
All that good stuff.
all the good stuff, all the fun stuff that people love to talk about in this industry. Yeah. Yeah. What about yourself?
Well, busy week. Work is seemingly busy again, at least for me. I don't know what other clinics like. What are your mentees saying about business?
Yeah, look, it's varied. Some people are really busy. Some people are finding it quieter. It really depends on how established they are, how long they've been injecting, how deep their client base is, where they're located, where they're positioned in the market. Are they sort of at the, I guess, lower end of the price point, higher end? It's quite varied. It's all over the place. But I think that there generally has been an upward shift in people's busyness, but that's kind of expected as we hit this end of the year.
Yeah, and also post-school holidays, everyone's
Correct.
back.
Yeah.
So that helps
Yeah,
a
a
lot.
lot of people were in Europe for a while as well. So that's
Yeah. Sounds great. Everyone's been in Greece and
yeah,
Italy.
I know. I haven't been anywhere.
Well, that's all right. We might be going somewhere next month.
Yeah, we might be, yeah.
But not confirmed.
Stay tuned.
As podcast, with our podcast hat on rather than doctor hat on.
Yeah, it'll be our first time being flown somewhere to cover an event, so we'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah. In my Patreon content for this week, I was doing a Sculptra treatment. So just, we had our practice managers just talking through, simple stuff like Reconstitution, the change in dilutions over the years, how I do it. Nothing too crazy, but a lot of people still a little bit unsure about biostimulators or which one's the best one and so on. So just a bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, because you're fairly new to the biostim kind of playground, aren't you?
I'm not new, but I've been not doing as much of it. So I actually learnt to use Radies in the UK. This is over 10 years ago. Sculptra I learnt with Kath Porter 2019 here in Sydney, but because of various reasons, mainly COVID, I didn't have the momentum to implement it into my clinic because I trained and then we hit COVID. And then, I was sort of trying to catch up for 2 years with just the backlog. And then there were also, grumblings of, which one's the best one? They hadn't changed the dilutions of Sculptra at that point.
All right.
So I just held off, wanted to see what happens. And then, of course, they changed their dilutions and the data seems to support there's much less risk of nodules.
Funny that.
Yeah, well, there you go. Add more water and
less complication.
Works better, exactly.
And how are you finding it as a practitioner? And are you happy with the results your patients are getting?
Yeah, look, I don't think anyone has done a year's worth yet. I only introduced it maybe 6 or 8 months ago. But yeah, everyone's super happy. Touch wood, no complications yet. Nice early results. Yeah, it's just different. It's not an alternative to HA. It's a different tool.
An adjunct.
And some people need HA, some need both, some need neither.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, just, I guess, to recap on our major news, this sort of happened a couple of weeks ago with the podcast. We now are doing subscriber-only episodes. So you'll notice with some of our podcasts, including this one, we're going to try and divide them into sort of two, I guess, simple halves, part one, part two. Part one of what will be free as always to anyone who wants to sort of engage with that. Part two will be reserved exclusively for our Patreon subscribers. So if you didn't know about that, all the information is at the bottom of the podcast. You can just read about how to sign up, what it's all about, why we've done it, and so on.
Yeah. I mean, and just to sort of follow on from what you're saying, people are still going to be getting episodes every month as they always have. Some of them will be split into two halves, and we may even do dedicated episodes in the future that are just subscription only. So this is obviously our way of growing the podcast, and really our aim is to grow our Patreon community, which has become massive over the last couple of years, but we'd like it to continue to grow, not only from our perspective, but just the community that we've created and the benefit that people receive from joining it and having that support from international people, whether you're a beginner, entry level, there's something for everybody. So it's just a strategy that we're trying, and hopefully people see the value. And
we have staff to pay. So that's the other reason. And we might be getting another staff member. So
yes.
So, there are obviously costs involved in this. So hopefully you see the value and you'd like to support us into the future. Now, let's introduce our special guest for today. It's Dr. Steve Weiner from Florida, USA. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Now, I'm going to do a test on you. Which episode do you think you were on last? We're currently on about 268 or something like that. When do you think you were with us last?
120.
I think it was about 151. I don't actually know. It was a long time ago. So it's nice to have you back. And in that one, we were talking about your rejuvenation techniques and the chin and the jawline. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and find it.
Yeah,
it was a good one. So Steve, tell our listeners who maybe haven't sort of been introduced to your background or come across your work yet. We've got a lot of new injectors and listeners. What's your background? How did you get into this? And what's your sort of day-to-day practice like?
So I'm a Hopkins-trained ENT, otolaryngologist, head and neck surgeon. And in that subspecialty, you do some facial plastics. So I did a little bit of that, and mainly general ENT from 95 to 2005. And then I switched. Completely to aesthetics. And in fact, I laid down my scalpel, and from that point on, all I did was injections as well as lasers. And I love the field because it wasn't stimulating my cerebrum as much as I would like. I became a little bit bored, and this field was like brand spanking new, and there was a lot of things to discover, new techniques, new tools and so forth, and I really ran with it. So I helped with the introduction of microcannulas. We didn't have those till like 2010, let's just say, and I really thought that those would hit it big, and obviously now they're standard. Then RF microneedling, I popularized in the States. And rejuvenation, also ultrasound in the States. I brought that after training with Leonie Schelke in Amsterdam in 2019. So I now have a very large practice, and I practice when I'm in the office, but otherwise I'm training or lecturing throughout the world. And I have a textbook coming out soon.
Oh, that's exciting.
The textbook is, I'm sure you know Chris Surik.
Yep.
Yeah. So Chris Surik is a plastic surgeon, friend of mine, and we've been doing cadaver labs almost monthly. And so he has a book that is anatomic atlas. And then that was the first version. Now the second version is also going to include ultrasound. So it's going to be ultrasound combined with, it'll be the first book that has done that. And that should be out next month.
Well, that is very exciting. If you like, we can partner with you and spread it and sell it and make more people aware of it. Because, this stuff is quite hard to find good knowledge. Mm-hmm. And people always ask me, what's the best textbook? So we'll be happy to help.
Maybe we'll have a chat off air about that later.
The artist is Effie, is it, from Australia?
Oh, I don't know. Effie, I'm not sure.
Look. Oh, God, I'm blanking on his name. Levant.
Right. Okay. No, not come across Levant.
Okay. He's from Australia. He's the best in the world. And he's our illustrator.
Oh, wow.
Well, we have to get him on and have a chat about all of that. That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. He's great.
Fantastic. Now, this whole podcast stemmed from, I guess, an Instagram live that everyone came across. All the injectors of the world were sharing this stuff. I think it was on July the 11th with our good friend from the podcast, April Harrison. She was on a previous episode as well. Now, we're not going to give away the punchline of basically what happened, but the premise was that you guys think you've come up with a new way of treating toxin resistance. Is that fair in a nutshell?
Yeah, It treats, not everyone has been successful, but I would say we're in the 40% range right now.
Right.
Okay. So should we maybe just start off by just reorientating people with what resistance is? Because it's a fairly debated topic. Is resistance real? Is it not? Is it injector error? Are there other, what are the factors that influence it? Is it frequency? Is it dose? There's been discussions around various vaccines, in terms of whether that increases people's immunoresponse and then that's leading to resistance. So could you just sort of give us a bit of a background in terms of just resistance in general?
Yeah, it's actually a very difficult subject to actually study. So there's a lot of theories, and basically the prevalent theory now is that you develop neutralizing antibodies to the active toxin. So you can have antibodies to the toxin, the active toxin, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's neutralizing. So there are approximately, I think the latest literature said that 1 in 10,000 actually have neutralizing antibodies. You can have actually antibodies to the toxin with never being exposed to the toxin. You just have it within your immune system. So it's the other thing is that if you have toxin to the associated protein, which is inactive, it doesn't matter because that's not going to prevent the toxin from working. So the whole spiel about using a toxin that is naked, that doesn't have the associated protein, is going to give you less chance of developing resistance. I don't believe it's the case because after about 60 seconds of adding saline to your vial of toxin, the two proteins dissociate if it does have an associated protein. So basically, when you're injecting all toxin, you're injecting the active toxin and the inactive toxin. Now, there is an argument, and I don't know how valid it is, but if you're injecting more protein load, then potentially you have more chance of developing antibodies in general. You're stimulating the immune system in general. Let's digress a little bit. When you inject a vaccine, you're injecting a protein. So when we inject a toxin, we're injecting a protein that potentially can cause an immune response. Fortunately, most people don't develop any antibodies to it, and they do fine for years and years and years and years. But it really is a real issue, I believe, in my practice and in several other injectors' practice, that there are people that are developing these resistance. Now, resistance is a spectrum. So resistance can be absolutely no response. Resistance could be minimal response, or resistance could actually be you get a response, but it's muted. It's 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So we haven't really done a formal study, but basically I would consider resistance in my population anyone that lasts 4 weeks or less. That's just it's not a normal response to the toxin.
Yeah.
Right.
If I could try and summarize that for maybe newbies or people who got a bit confused there. So in your vial of not all the toxins, let's say Dysport or Botox are good examples. You have a powder or a vacuum freeze liquid with toxin and a coat of what we call complexing proteins or accessory proteins. Now, as soon as you said, when you put saline in that vial, the Botox and the protein dissociate. They're separate entities in liquid. You inject it in the body, and most people never develop these things called neutralizing antibodies, so they don't become resistant. But you still got the protein swishing around in that liquid, and the protein's also injected in the face. Now, of course, you can then still develop what people might call non-neutralizing antibodies to either the toxin or the protein, but these are just, like you said, it's just like almost like your immune system's response to something being in the body, but it doesn't necessarily mean you become resistant. Is that how you understand it?
Right. It has to be in a special place on the toxin to actually remove its ability to bind.
Yes. And so what actually happens when that, let's call it the neutralizing antibody, actually does bind to a particular place on the core neurotoxin? How does it stop it working?
Well, it actually is just physically in the way.
Yeah.
So it just, the key doesn't fit in the hole, basically, because there's something in the way. And the other key thing is once an antibody does bind, the body tries to remove it. It's now declared something foreign, and the body it's not supposed to be there. So how good your immune system is also a factor in removing this.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, and then you mentioned, David, the vaccines and COVID and so forth. And I really believe that actually probably precipitated a lot of these problems. So when you give a vaccine for COVID, especially, you really, really turn on the immune system. So the surveillance of the body is now hyped up. I don't know how many fold, but it's more sensitive to these proteins than it used to be. Mm-hmm. So then when you inject, the body says, is on high alert already. It attacks it much more aggressively than it used to.
Right. Okay.
The same thing happens with COVID. So some people say, well, I never got the vaccine. Well, COVID hypes up the immune system too. So both of those, I believe, increase the resistance to the tox.
Right.
That's actually a really good point because, bit sidetrack here, but when people are sick and wanting a filler treatment, I think most injectors would, default and say, let's wait till you're better. I don't want you to get either infection or excessive swelling or delayed onset nodules. That's reasonable. But I think most injectors don't have the same thought process for toxin. They're like, you're okay, you're not going to get an infection, we'll just treat you. But I think you're right, Steve. If your immune system is acting up, you're fighting a upper respiratory tract infection or anything, it might not be a good idea to introduce a biological entity like Botox into that patient because you might rarely increase the risk of potential resistance. I don't have any proof of that. It just seems kind of logical. Do you take that stance with your patients or not?
If they're sick, I don't inject them with anything.
Yeah.
I think it's a very hard no for any type of implant, filler in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If they're saying, I had something 5 days ago and I'm really over it, I just have a residual little cough or something, that's a game time decision. On that.
Yeah, I guess if you're trying to be so almost elitist about it, you never treat anyone because no one's ever fully well, are they? But, if they've got a temperature and they're coughing all over the place, not only do I not want to be coughed on, but, I don't want to ramp up their immune system even more. Mm-hmm. I just want to touch on one thing, Steve. I don't know if you've commented on this, and I kind of agree what you're saying about the Botulinum toxin or Xeomin. I guess the marketing is that this is a pure toxin. There's no accessory proteins. Therefore, the risk of, this type of problem that we're discussing is negligible. But, if you look at just the data, according to what I read, in Xeomin, in a vial, there's still 0.55 nanograms of accessory protein, but versus Botox 4.5 nanograms and Dysport 5.5 nanograms, there's more. But it doesn't mean there's zero in Xeomin. So,
I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, look, I don't want to misquote this. I'll send you the paper, and I'm happy to put the paper at the bottom that I read, but it's not zero. So, that's interesting. But the other side of the coin, when Botox was first launched, way back in the early 90s, it had a much higher protein load. Let's call it old Botox. And we do know that those people subjected to that toxin became more resistant, about 25% in some quotes. So maybe there is something in this protein thing, but nowadays with new Botox, if you like, I don't know how to word it better, we very rarely see it, as well as with Dysport and, of course, Xeomin and any other brand. So I guess what I'm asking is how important is the protein? Because you said it isn't.
I'm giving you an opinion. I do know that there is at least one paper that was sponsored by Merz that said in resistant patients that Xeomin has worked. But that's so biased that I don't think we can include that.
Yeah.
There are some injectors who will say, I found a resistant patient. Let's just swap the brand to Xeomin because that's the one that doesn't have proteins. It doesn't make sense because you've already created, antibodies if we're going to go down that theory. And so why would it make any difference? It's the same core neurotoxin that's going to get attacked by a neutralizing antibody. That's
another point. Sometimes these people get desperate and they say, you're having problems with Dysport. Let's try Botox. So that didn't really work so well. Let's go to Xeomin.
Yeah.
Let's go to... I do think Daxxify is a different species, but I'm telling people really try not to waste your time, energy, and money to try all these other ones because it probably isn't going to work. If anything, it might work a smidge better, and that might be related, as you said, David, technique, dilution, and units. So I do believe that units. So you can have pseudo-resistance, and pseudo-resistance would be technical error with the injection, not enough units, improperly placed. All these three things will give similar results to someone being resistant, but actually not being resistant.
Yeah. See, and I think that's the crux of this whole issue. And maybe with April's case, I don't know. I wasn't there, and April's a very skilled injector, so I respect that she knows what she's doing. But I do see a lot of patients either referred to me or you hear these stories and, we've sort of just touched on it. But by far and away, the most common issue is just wasn't either injected properly or not enough units. That it's as simple as that. And, the problem is, at least here in Australia, we don't have a good way of formally testing people for resistance. To get an antibody test, it's incredibly expensive, and I believe it's got to be sent somewhere like Germany. It's not done here in Australia. So no one's going to do that. They'll just try and add more or bounce around using different tox brands, like you just said. And you just end up with this sort of snake oil story that, they're resistant and everyone's losing their minds. And then lo and behold, the next week when someone else tries, it works.
Well, let me use a little teaser here. I think that one of the functions of our theoretical improvements is somewhat related to that. So, but I'm not going to give it away. That's Patron.
Okay, fair
Patreon.
enough. Yeah. No, that's Patreon content. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Because we've got the true resistant patients, and I'm from everything that I've understood from a layperson looking, at this from as much as I can from a technical perspective, it seems like that's like a minuscule percentage. But then you've got all these other confounding factors, not injected properly, dilution potentially, that are making the problem seem much bigger than what it is. Then you've got this game of Chinese whispers, social media, people, it's like this mess where you've got like an issue that obviously is real, but it's being blown way out of proportion and being perpetuated through the way that we can communicate now and just people listening to each other and not sort of qualifying
using critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It's an issue, isn't it?
There's a large Facebook group with tox resistance, and they are all over this as well, and so it is feeding the fire a little bit. The popularity of this, but there definitely is something there.
Yeah. Okay.
One other thing. When I say that trying all the other things, which is in the United States is Xeomin, Jeuveau, Botox, Dysport, and Daxxify, they're all botulinum toxin A. That's key. That's why I say that if you're resistant to any one of these, you're resistant to botulinum toxin A. There is a botulinum toxin B out there, and that's called mild block. And I haven't had personal experience, but the experience of my colleagues has been that some of these do respond. The problem is that it's expensive. I don't know exactly how expensive it is. The units are much different, so you have to learn to convert the units. It stings a lot.
Yeah.
And some people develop resistance to that too.
Yeah.
So some people have said, yeah, it worked once or maybe twice. And it's like 6 to 8 weeks.
Mm. Can we just talk about injector error for a second? What does that actually mean? And some of the discussions that we've had on the podcast before circulated around this concept of training people really quickly to do toxin fillers, like, weekend or couple of week courses, and people are sort of overloaded with like all this data and information that they're expected to absorb and go and start treating patients. And I've always been in the position, if I were to have my time again as a business owner, and how I would potentially slow down the training or the development of an injector and starting them on tox for a longer period of time before they even graduate into looking at fillers. Because I just think, this kind of podcast kind of highlights the fact that we shouldn't be having injector issues when it comes to something like tox. That should be something that should just be nipped in the bud, that people should know how to do it properly. So what do you mean by injector error? Is it not going deep enough? Is it not knowing facial anatomy? Elevated depressor relationships? Like, what do you actually mean? What are people doing wrong, and how can they do it properly?
Well, there's errors where you drop brows, drop eyelids, and so forth. But those aren't what we're going to talk about here.
Sure.
Those are different problems. Problems are you need to get the toxin into the muscle end plate, the muscles basically. And the most common area that we inject, obviously, is the glabella. And if you're not, the medial corrugator is deep onto the bone. So you must inject deeply onto the bone. And then the lateral corrugator is going to be very superficial because it interdigitates with the skin and the frontalis muscles. So those two depths are very critical in the injection. Now, the eye periocular area, it's a very superficial injection. That's usually not an issue. The forehead is the most difficult area to inject for a number of reasons. One is that it's the only elevator. If you inject too much, you're going to drop brows and potentially even drop an eyelid. But the frontalis muscle is actually at variable depths. And I learned a lot from ultrasound. So low down in the forehead, you have retrofrontalis fat pads. So it actually is not on the bone in the lower forehead. And then once you go more superiorly, that fat pad goes away, and it really does rest very close to the periosteum. However, the frontalis muscle is bounded on either side by a fascia, the galeofascia. So it's very difficult to really hit that on target because it's a thin muscle and it's bounded by these fascia. So some people say, well, you need to inject deep. Well, if you're on the periosteum, you're definitely below the fascia. You're definitely below the galea. And so you got to be kind of on just off of the periosteum in the upper forehead and actually a little more superficial in the lower forehead. I do think that our technique helps with those errors too.
I agree with what you say, Steve, and I think where the toxin is put is probably the most important issue and maybe the most common error. But at the same time, I guess to balance the argument, unless you're a really heavily built individual, mainly men generally, but you can have women with sort of thicker foreheads and frontalises, that you're just getting it in there. It generally is quite a thin area, and we depend on the pharmacokinetics of the diffusion of toxin. It will catch the fibers in most instances. Even an unskilled, first-time injector will generally get a result. So it's kind of hard to completely miss it, I guess, is my bottom line. And so if you do a whole frontalis with 10 or even 20 units and nothing happens, like nothing, and you've got good photos to prove that, then that would pique my interest that maybe there's something weird going on. But if it's like a muted response or asymmetry, then sure, I think it could be more technique related than resistance. But, most people don't do good photography. Most people don't even remember where their injections went and so on. So try to unpack what actually happens in these cases. Actually, it's that's where the pseudoscience for me sort of creeps in.
I agree with you 100%. It's, but the frontalis seems to be the most complained about area too, in regards to longevity.
Yeah.
So if you completely rely on diffusion, a lot of that toxin isn't actually going to bind.
Yeah.
And I think that's another part of my theory that we'll get on later on in the program.
Yeah.
There was one other point. And this is kind of off subject, but I wanted to get this in before the second part. The frequency.
Yeah.
And the frequency of injection seems to be the most important factor in developing resistance.
Yeah.
Outside of exposure to COVID or the vaccine. That seems to be it. And the more frequently you inject, you're basically inoculating the patient.
Yeah.
And they're seeing the toxin more frequently, which is why I believe that I see a lot more providers have this problem than the general population.
Because they're dipping in the little 2 units left and just throwing it in because they don't want to waste it.
What's it, getting higher on your own supply? Yeah. So frequency is an issue. So we've had on your good friend, Dr. John Joseph, some time ago, and he sort of blew our minds with his theories and some of the studies that he's now doing in relation to hyperdilution and sort of doing these super high doses, getting more longevity. So being able to dial up and dial down the longevity of his results, and some of the stuff he was doing like in the perioral region with like these ridiculous dosages and not getting side effects. Really interesting stuff. What's your position on that? So, I mean, if you're going to be looking at, making them more concentrated injections, therefore you may need less frequency, could that potentially be a problem solved kind of situation? Or what's your position on that?
I love John. I respect all his work. I mean, he's been involved with Toxin forever. I feel that you are probably wasting some toxin in doing these very, very concentrated. He is attacking the receptors in a slightly different way that I'm attacking them. Mm-hmm. Okay, he's overloading them with toxin, and I'm trying to do it in a different way. And I believe that my solution will also give longer longevity.
Interesting.
Because of that.
So again, just for the listeners who maybe missed that one, we did a great podcast with John. And by the way, you introduced me to John in Miami, so thank you for the hookup. Yeah. I appreciate that.
That's right.
Yeah. What John basically says is we have a standard reconstitution dilution
2.5,
normally. Yeah. So if you're making Botox, 2.5 mils for 100 units. And many people stick to that, including myself for many years. And then John said, well, hold on a minute. That's just like a puddle of liquid with a number of units in it. But what if we make the puddle half the size, but keep the same number of units in there? And if we inject a muscle, more units will stay in the muscle rather than, sort of spilling out of the muscle, and therefore might work better. And at least in his studies, getting longer longevity with the same dose, let alone doubling the dose. So that was interesting. But what he also quite interestingly caveated was if you go too concentrated, you actually don't get enough units into enough of the muscle. It's too laser focused, if you like. And so, there's like a happy balance between normal dilution or even hyper diluted versus too concentrated. So I think the theory to me made sense, but I mean, tell us more about your sort of, I guess, opposite view, Steve.
I do believe that, it's very arbitrary what was initially picked by as a dilution, 2.5 to whatever. There was really no science behind it whatsoever.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I also agree that when you inject toxin, that some of it goes away and never becomes effective.
Yeah.
So his theory is that I'm going to give it a lot of toxin. I'm going to be sure where I inject that entire area, every quote last bit maybe of those end plates is affected. Now, my technique, just like you mentioned, I can give in different areas half the dose and get the same effect as twice the dose. So there is a study that has proven that. So I believe that my technique enhances the binding of the toxin in a different way than Daxxify does.
Yeah.
Because that's Daxxify's theory too. And I don't know how much you want me to get into this versus the next one, but you can cut it out if you want. But Daxxify basically uses the same amount of active toxin, but gives longer duration. So you give, let's just say Botox of 20 units and Daxxify at 40 units, which is 0.18 nanograms of active toxin, but the Daxxify gives you longer. What does that mean? That basically means when you're giving the Botox, that a lot of it isn't actually binding. The Daxxify incipient protein allows for better binding.
Right.
So how can I create better binding in a different way? So John Joseph does it by adding more toxin, and I'm doing it in a slightly different way.
Okay, fair enough. So this comes to an interesting point. There's sort of two parts to this. So you're the ultrasound man. You do a lot with your Claris, and I've got a Claris as well. I love it. But if we're saying that the root cause of potentially a lot of this is getting the toxin in the muscle, are you playing around with using toxin under ultrasound to visualize putting it in the muscle? And maybe one step further, maybe doing slightly different dilutions so you can visualize it in a tiny little puddle of liquid being in the middle of the belly so you know it's there and you're not wasting any toxin at all.
That's a good point. I really have only done that in the masseter muscle. The problem is that you really need a longer needle to visualize it. And I'm more concerned about losing some toxin through that longer needle. And it's not practical for the masses. Mm-hmm. So I guess I can do it and see if I get better results longer. So I think that duration also is important. And again, that could be pseudo-resistance or real resistance.
Yeah.
So I know that there are people in Korea, and they patented the name Sonotox, and they do most of their toxin with the ultrasound, at least in the masseter, because they want to get deep and superficial to that deep intermediate tendon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you bring up a good point. I do think that, again, the frontalis muscle is the hard one to get. I think if you're down on bone in the medial corrugator and you're kind of superficial, and people don't usually complain to me too much about the corrugators. It's the frontalis that bothers them the most.
Well, I'll tell you why I bring it up. It sort of seems logical to me, and David had a good point. When we're training injectors, you start somewhere, you learn the 5-point glabella and the cookie cutter patterns, and then you sort of develop on that. But really, most people are leaning on kind of an old model of 2D injecting rather than 3D injecting, or let alone ultrasound. And so you're just kind of guessing a lot of the time where these muscles are, or assuming because you've had a little look at them frowning or whatever. But really, you're never quite sure. So, along with your point, you're probably wasting a lot of your toxin because it's not in the muscle. So, you can do this on Instagram. Just watch people doing their toxin on Instagram. It's hilarious. Some of them are nowhere near the corrugator when they're doing the glabella. They're actually in lower frontalis. And so, you're sort of like, wow, you're actually going to drop the brow rather than treat the frown. But these patients are seemingly happy, and they kind of get a pseudo result where some of glabella is treated, but also some of frontalis. And as long as the wrinkle's gone, they're kind of happy. So I sort of feel like if we were to aim for a gold standard, everything would be done under ultrasound because we would know where our product is. But it's just impractical. Well, you know, most people don't have the skill or the time to do that.
I think that we should develop maybe a ultrasound specifically that probe.
Yeah.
That we can use little needles on, that we can maybe attach to the side and see.
That'd be awesome.
That might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, you got contacts at Clarius. Get it sorted out, Steve.
I think Philips has one that they're developing for a finger.
Yeah.
So that might be what that probe is for.
Yeah. And I guess what makes it challenging is you've got so many different people walking through your clinic with different genetic backgrounds, different insertion points where their muscles are. And so when you learn this cookie cutter approach, that might work on X percentage of the population, but then you've got all these anomalies and people that have got different structures, and it's hard to build up that bank of knowledge. And if you're not seeing your patients for reviews and you don't have that experience under your belt, it's going to be hard to hit it out of the park every time. Is that kind of what you're saying, Jake, in terms of?
Yeah, for sure. Like, everyone is different. And, you know, unless you really look at your patient, and I'm a massive believer in marking everyone up. I'm not good enough or arrogant enough to think that I can just do it without marking up a patient properly, and understanding that not every patient needs the same dose. Some need more, some need less. It's got to be bespoke. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you know, you're just sort of hoping for an average result, because the studies are based on average, right? And they tend to be Caucasian middle-aged women.
Yeah.
You get away with it like you described because of the diffusion. And I think the injections diffuse, the typical injection diffuses about a centimeter.
Yeah.
And so it brings up a whole other can of worms. You know, the rapidity of the injection, the force of the injection, the size of the needle, all that results in differences in diffusion and risks associated with it. So there's a lot of issues there too. So it's not to be taken lightly, these injections, although they are.
Yeah. What about preserved saline versus regular saline? Have you noticed any sort of differences when you're using different reconstitution liquids?
There's stuff on Instagram about this as well. It's driving me mental.
So apparently, John Joseph just described that the preserved saline makes the toxin a little less effective than without the bacteriostatic. I haven't run across that, but that's something I was just told.
Yeah, I've heard the odd little murmuring, not from John, but you know, in fact, there was one case series that we actually discussed, I think, on a recent podcast, where some practitioners have done a little case series where they actually treated brow ptosis with preserved saline in an attempt to sort of reverse the toxin effect, and they claim it worked, but I don't understand that.
That paper, my colleagues shot holes in it. It's no good. That doesn't make physiologic sense.
No.
But what I'm referring to is you mix a vial with regular saline, you mix a vial with bacteriostatic saline, and John Joseph has said that the regular saline has a more effective toxin than the other.
Yeah. So the speculation is if you use your toxin on the day or quickly, that tiny percentage of alcohol have no effect and there'll be the same result. But if you left it for 3 weeks, sure, maybe I could understand there could be some degradation because of the alcohol. Maybe. But I've not seen it in real life. So I don't know. Now, I guess to sort of end part one, as it were, let's just sort of get real with, I guess, some real life statistics here. How common do you think resistance actually is? Because we've sort of spoken a whole podcast about pseudo-resistance or real resistance, but how many of these people are actually walking around, and how problematic is it in your opinion?
It's probably 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000. It's not that common.
I mean,
that's still quite pretty high.
I mean, you know, just put my cards on the table, and I'm only my own experience. I've only met one patient in 16 and a bit years of injecting where I could categorically, without obviously doing antibody tests, but categorically say, yes, you are resistant. And if you speak to the gurus, Michael Caine or people like that who've got far more experience than we do, they'll tell you the numbers are very rare as well. I don't know the exact number, but, you know, 1 in 10,000 or more rare.
Yeah, I think that's in the literature.
Yeah. So why is it that from your Instagram live, you sort of guys alluded to the fact that you're seeing more of it? So what's your theory on that?
Well, I think that some of it's related to the vaccine and COVID. I'm sure of it. A lot of people that have messaged me said that right around that period is when they noticed it. I think that there's another theory, actually. So I'll bring it up here, or we can cut it. But that not all resistance is actually immune related.
Mm.
So Peter Velhas, I'm sure you know Peter.
Yes, too.
Yeah. So he has noticed, as well as Leone, that when you inject the masseters, that you do get a little fibrosis of the muscle when you inject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, and I'm not sure if he's written a paper yet or he will be writing a paper on it. So the theory is that, you're causing a little bit of scar tissue within that muscle. Now, that's a huge muscle, insignificant change, okay? But how about in the smaller muscles, the frontalis, and even, again, the frontalis is really thin and really small. What if you have a bunch of fibrotic spots and you try to inject those spots? Could those be resistant, those little fibrotic areas? So that's one of his theories that he's working on.
So I actually texted Peter last night because I heard you mention his name in your live. And to be honest, this is, I don't sort of want to quote him because I don't know if he's actually doing a study on resistance or if it was just a aberrant finding, looking at masseters just doing toxin. It could be totally unrelated, but he basically said he can't comment, but he just noticed there was a point of fibrosis in the muscle, which may have reduced the toxin effect, and he's talking about the masseter on that scan. Again, I think it's an interesting theory, but to counter it, how many millions of people get regular tox every 3 or 4 months for 20 years and don't have this problem? So why aren't they getting fibrosis? If that's a relevant theory. So maybe there are random people walking around who are more likely to form these scars or fibrosis. Who knows?
There's more people getting treatments. People are getting them more regularly. People who didn't report resistance maybe now reporting it because they realize it's a phenomenon. They're not crazy. So
because they saw it on Instagram.
It's probably so complicated. There's probably not one answer to the problem. It's probably multifaceted.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop this one here so we don't give any more gold away.
Why don't we just give them the preview for what we're actually going to be talking about in part 2?
Okay, well, part 2, we're going to be talking about April's case.
Yes.
We're going to be talking about what I guess led to Steve creating a new theory about how he might tackle this, and an apparent cure or cure in some patients with a resistance. So that's what we're dangling for part 2.
So how do people listen to part 2 if they don't currently subscribe? What's the process?
Well, park your car before you read the podcast description, but go to the bottom of this podcast, read the description. But in a nutshell, sign up for our Patreon. We have 2 tiers. It's very cheap, or you can get much more as well as the subscriber-only episodes. So that the higher tier, which is Patreon tier, you get all of David's business videos, you get all of my injecting videos, you get access to our WhatsApp chats and kind of a lot more. But if you just want podcasts and nothing else, it's the supporter tier.
Okay.
So just sign up for that, and then there'll be instructions on how you actually get the podcast.
Awesome. All right, guys, we'll see you in part 2.
Thank you, Steve. We'll see you in part 2. For our latest news, follow us on Instagram at Inside Aesthetics Podcast. If you want to get in touch with myself or David, follow us on Instagram as well at Dr. Jake Sloan and David_Inside Aesthetics.
Join our Patreon for invaluable business and injectable education. Get access to our global community of like-minded professionals, live and interactive Zoom sessions, hints and tip videos, webinars, and more. Head over to www.insideaesthetics.com/Patreon for more information.